So in this video we're going to look at basically a more context-aware system with the embed. So we're looking at a practical application really. The application that we're going to talk about is if we could imagine kind of like a greenhouse where basically we're monitoring the temperature within the room or within the greenhouse, and then we're going to use a motor over here which will open and close a window. Okay. And at the start, we're just going to look at some of the hardware. Now, this is just an example setup of what could be done. Okay, obviously there's many ways of solving this problems, many very sophisticated methods of doing it, and we're just going to highlight a couple of things at the moment. Now, if I just zoom in a little bit to what we actually have got here in terms of the hardware. Now, I'm lucky that I've got three basically breadboards that I can build a circuit on, so I can spread things out and keep things nice and neat. Just the usual sort of problem, ran out of some jump leads here, which would have been handy just to tidy up the addition of the stepper motor. But essentially just at the top breadboard we have got our additional power supply so that we can set up a 5-volt power supply. We have the driver board for the stepper motor, so we've looked at that in detail, sort of the the different the code and how we can set it up and how we can control it. So we've done that in the wiring, we've talked about that. Just on the stepper motor, just to kind of represent it turning and to see its position, I've just put a little clip on it. Then we've got the breadboard, or sorry, not the on the second breadboard we have got the embed controller itself. Okay, mostly it's this circuit board is just used for connecting in, but I have put some LEDs on it just to display different modes. And what I've done is I've put the green LED for opening the window, which essentially has been controlled by the motor, so that's just going to let us know that we're opening. The red LED is going to let us know we're closing, and what I've done is I've actually done the orange LED that's pulsing. Basically it's turning on periodically, so every couple of seconds, whatever we set it to, and it's going to let us know that it's taking temperature each time it does that. Then just down here on the last breadboard, I've got my LCD display, I've got a potentiometer, I've got my temperature sensor, so an LM35, I've got some DIL switches, and I've got a push button just to give us a bit of a user interface. So down here below is just kind of my user interface for the circuit. Okay, now I will show it operating in a bit and kind of explain the reasonings for each of the setup, but it's again up to the person themselves how they're going to solve this problem. They could where I'm using the potentiometer, they could use it for a different reason. They don't have to include all the switches and all the buttons, but it's just to give them an idea of what could be expected. Now really when we're looking at the hardware, we should pay attention to the wiring first. So I've covered in a lot of the videos how to wire each of these individually up. The only one I don't think I've done is the temperature sensor. So it's very similar basically to the potentiometer in the sense that we've got ground, so our black wire is ground. Our red wire is just connected to 3.3 volts. That's coming straight from the embed itself. And then we've got our analog signal that's going into the orange lead. That's just coming into one of our analog input pins on the embed. So it's the same setup for the temperature sensor. Just make sure you have the temperature sensor the right way around in the correct orientation when you're wiring that up. With the potentiometer it doesn't matter. Okay, so basically some of the reasons for using these, obviously I'm measuring temperature, so I need my temperature sensor. What I'm also doing is I'm giving a bit of a user interface here of like a dial control that you might have on basically like a climate control system. Okay, so you'll see that operating in a wee bit. I've also added in some push buttons. Again, has a bit of user interface to set some temperatures or to change temperatures, and I've also got this DIL switch, so kind of like a detent switch, nearly like a switch on at your home for your lights, and that's basically to kind of flick between two different modes of control for the motor. So again, we'll see that operating, but that's just some of the reasons for doing it. So their inputs, they're wired in on the input, so you can see those yellows are going into just some digital input pins. We've got our LCD display, so we've got that set up. Again, I've done a video of how to set that up and wire it up, so it's just the same sort of process, just made it look a little bit neater. We've got various power supplies, so most of the red here is going to 3.3 volts, and that was taken basically from the mbed itself. I'm also using the 4.8 volts or whatever it is, that other output coming from the mbed. I'm also using that to power the LCD, and then just to power the motor at the end, I'm using the external 5 volts supply. And then just, you got to remember to make sure that you common ground, so you'll see there's a common ground pin being joined between all the breadboards to make sure everything's grounded. So that's basically all the hardware I'm using for this application. Again, it's not going to be a fully developed solution when I'm showing it. I'm going to highlight some kind of pitfalls and things to think about, but essentially you can wire this up whatever way you want. You could change it about, add in more lights, add in buzzers, more switches or whatever it is, but this is just an example of one solution to give you some ideas. Okay, so hopefully that's clear, and in the next video we'll look at it operating and discuss some of the functions that's within the code and within the system itself.